Welcome in San Diego, it's Jade Hindman. On today's show, fast fashion is polluting the environment, especially beaches around the globe. We'll tell you how locals are using their creativity to upcycle fabrics into unique fashions. This is KPBS Midday Edition, connecting our communities through conversation. Fashion can be a way to express yourself or celebrate your culture. It can also promote sustainability. One person's clothing scraps or another designer's art palette. And Claudia Rodriguez Bizonsky holds the needle and thread. In 2013, she opened a sewing shop and studio in Barrio Logan called Loka. Claudia, welcome to Midday Edition.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
So glad to have you here. So tell me about the vision for Loka.
Well, the vision for Loka is, it's big. It's really big. We are a workshop space, but we also, a third of our space is retail. So everything that is made in the studio is then sold in that third of the space. And we really wanted to create this inclusive space, right? Where we can teach people how to be more sustainable within their own clothes, show them alternatives of what could happen to their clothes that they don't love anymore, and really creating that inclusive environment of belonging to something.
Yeah. Well, and at what point in your life did you really take an interest in sustainability through fashion?
So I believe that started when I was in middle school. It came out of necessity, right? I'm one of 6 kids, and I really wanted to have all the cool punk rock clothes because I was in the punk scene. And being one of 6 kids, it wasn't really accessible for my parents to do back to school shopping or any of that stuff. But what was accessible is a garage full of sewing machines. And so my mom was like, we'll go to the thrift store, we'll cut up things, and then you can have really cool, fun stuff. And so I really got into the sustainability more out of necessity. And I feel as a Mexican American, we were always kind of taught sustainability, right? Like, we've always put our salsa in that butter container and, recycled everything. And so I really feel that was what really drove me into wanting to have really cool clothes.
Nice. See, for my family, that country crock container, spaghetti.
Exactly.
Always spaghetti in there.
I love it.
Well, I mean, it seems everyone is thrifting and upcycling now. Do you think this trend is happening for the same reasons you took such an interest in sustainable fashion?
I do think so. I feel... Oh my God, I get so passionate about this. Sorry. I feel that it gives you a really good footing inside of that industry, right? Becoming more accessible. Clothing has become a little bit more accessible, but also wanting to have identity, right? And so going to a thrift store, you're not going to find more than just one. You're gonna just find that one, and you can make it really special. You don't have that guilt of cutting it up, getting it tailored, all that stuff. And so I'm so happy that more people are shopping secondhand, because there was a time where it wasn't the cool thing to do. And so now that people have that, that creativity and that passion and that mindfulness of what is this creating for our communities, what kind of waste, but also what is it doing in the long term for our climate and climate change and our planet.
And what's that one song? I'm gonna pop
yes,
some
Mexico.
Yes. Thrift shop.
Going thrifting.
That's it. I think that so made it popular.
Yes.
Well, what role do you think social media plays in eco-friendly fashion trends?
Gigantic role. So right now I am working at Arts, A Reason to Survive in National City. I love that organization for many reasons, but I teach sewing there to high school kids. It's an after school program. I'm always very mindful, and I'm a great listener. I want to hear what people need and how I could fill that void, and understanding that younger demographic was really interested in the thrift flip. And so I was like, I'm gonna meet my kids where they want to learn how to sew, and that was with the thrift flip. And so right now we have a 10-week program where I teach kids sustainability through sewing, and it's a lot of fun because I feel like that is the easiest way of getting into sewing, where something's already made and maybe you'll have to make these small adjustments, and it gives you that sense of pride of being able to have this outfit that you made. Someone's always going to compliment you on it, and then you're going to have that sense of pride of I made this. And that I feel like that's the perfect time to get into that industry and then really start to get excited excited and want to continue to build off of that. So building confidence through sewing through the thrift flip.
And why is that sharing of knowledge important to you?
Well, I am originally from LA, and I didn't go to school for any of this kind of stuff, but I've always been a very curious person. And I feel like sometimes we come across people that might want to gatekeep some things. And for me, it was one of those things where I was like, why would I want to gatekeep all this information? Sewing is like a very vast world. I'm not intimidated by someone wanting to learn how to sew. I actually want to be that person that could break it down and very simplify it for you and give you all the resources.
Right. And I mean, you have an opportunity to make such like an individual piece.
Yes.
Something totally different and style it. So that's really cool. I think it's a cool aspect.
I feel like you get that sense of pride, because I had this experience when I was like 12 and I was walking in the mall and I thought I was like so cool and I had like this really cool tank top, and then someone right across the hall was wearing the same tank top, but she was an older woman, more developed, and so I felt like who wore it better, and I didn't like that. You know, it really made me feel like I wasn't good enough to wear that tank top, and so having that trauma really like allowed for me to think about like, hey, I want to create pieces that are as individual as that person that's wearing it, and for them to feel like this was created specifically for me. And that does make us feel a little bit better about ourselves.
Yeah. I tell you, we've all had moments like that.
I know. Unfortunately.
Well, it's not all about what we do with our clothes once we get them. It starts at the resource. So I want to talk about a statewide bill that just passed, the Responsible Textile Recovery Act. It requires producers to come up with a plan for recycling or reusing garments. Talk to me about that.
Yes, I'm very excited about that because, for us, we've been doing it for such a really long time. I mean, that is something that has been part of like who I am for a really long time. And so the fact that California gets to create like such a gigantic impact, in textile waste, for me, I'm like, whoa, this is gigantic for us because it really allows for manufacturers to basically be able to take in all that used clothes, blankets, curtains, things like that, and recycle it appropriately. And we're really excited about that because it is taking accountability for all this waste that we're producing. We need to be accountable for all that stuff. We can't just kind of like, give it to someone and pass it on. It's like, how do we create these programs that really allow us to be educated, right? Because education with textile waste is so important. It's educating people, not shaming them for these decisions. And I understand that a lot of the times, convenience and time is one of those things where people usually tend to lean on for, purchasing goods, things like that. And so this really allows for us to really think about why this bill is really important and how this is going to change and how we are going to be that change.
Yeah. I don't think people realize how big of a problem textile waste is. And, earlier we talked about the power of social media.
Yes.
When it comes to eco-friendly clothing and fashion, but they could also be blamed on fast fashion.
Yes.
Tell me about that.
There's so many things about fast fashion, right? It's like that need to want more. Wanting more is obviously one of those things where it's like, I want to have options. I get it. We all want to have options. We all want to be able to have, things that are very inexpensive. But what it created a lot of clothes. And most of this clothes ends up in a landfill. And so it's really mindful to think about where your clothes is coming from and like, what is the true cost?
Mm-hmm.
Because you might go on to like one of those websites and then see it and be like, wow, it's only $5. But the real cost isn't that price tag. The real cost is like, polluting our waterways, creating like climate change. And I feel that fast fashion really takes advantage of women in other countries. And, it's nice to look cute in an outfit and all that kind of stuff. But what's really, really cool, and I feel like what's really like showing us where we're headed is like really being mindful of like where your products come from.
Right. Fast fashion is all about bulk designs, but your work is about individual style and the very things that you repurpose, fabrics, old t-shirts. Those are also what make these pieces so unique. How does fashion serve as a form of artistic expression for you?
Oh my goodness. So for a lot of reasons, having that experience as a 12-year-old at the mall was like so traumatizing for me that I really wanted to create goods that were going to be individual, where it could speak for you without you even having to speak, where it has phrases that maybe for a really long time we kind of didn't want to be so proud of. Creating those kind of things for me, where for a really long time I always thought like, I want people to like see me and then understand that I'm a creative, and that was like something where I was like, oh, I want to be like a creative person when I grow up. What does that look like? And so for me, like, maybe someone doesn't love this print, but maybe I could turn it into something that like I could love. It's all about like the things that make me happy, and instead of like the things that someone is telling me that should be making me happy. And so I feel like a lot of those kind of, the design process is based on like comfort for me, and that ability of being able to wear something and know that no one else is wearing it.
Right. Well, and you touched on this, but fashion is also a way to honor culture. How has that been a tool for you throughout your life and now through Loka?
For a lot of reasons. So when I was growing up, there wasn't a lot of representation, right? And so I always felt like if there was representation when I was growing up, it would have been one of those things where I feel like I could have achieved more and I could have dreamt bigger, but there wasn't. So for me, like being able to like have representation in my clothes where, I have some stuff that says brown AF, I have stuff that says morena, I have, where you have that sense of pride of like being like, hey, I am this darker shade of brown, but I'm proud of that, and so different things like that where I really like to incorporate traditional huipiles and traditional embroidery into like my designs to have that representation of streetwear, where you wouldn't usually like see, then you're like, oh, that was a table mat, and then all of a sudden you made it into like a really cool jacket. And so those are all like things where you could see it, and if that is your culture, you're gonna recognize it and you're gonna be like, wow, we can mold these things into what we would like to see them as.
Yeah. Well, I mean, and fashion isn't just, the clothes you wear. It's everything, down to the little details like makeup and jewelry. How do those accessories celebrate identity too?
Oh my goodness. So eyeliner.
Yes.
So I was talking to my sister earlier today, and I have a 12-year-old that keeps taking my eyeliner. And I was telling her, I'm like, hey, I got this interview and I can't show up without eyeliner. Are you kidding me? Like, I gotta make sure it's nice and sharp. And I feel like that has since I remembered, I would have my older sister, because she had more of a steady hand, put eyeliner on me, and that was like a huge identity for being first generation Mexican American Chicana. And I feel like eyeliner, and especially that wing, has been such a representation of just sleekness. Having it be like so precise is like, it's just one of those things where it's like, it's almost like status, because you're like, you have a nice steady hand. Yeah. But also that gold jewelry, right? Yeah. And so having gold jewelry on like our brown skin is like the ultimate like cherry on top. And so, hoops, all that stuff. And I feel like definitely tattoos have been one of those things where you got the Virgin Mary, you got a Sacred Heart, you got things like that like really like represent us as people and individuals.
I love that.
Thank you.
I'm like the same way about lipstick.
Yes.
Must have lipstick. It's just a celebration.
Comfort.
It
it's
is. Well, what has the art of sewing taught you about yourself and your community?
Oh my God, that's such a beautiful question. It's taught me a lot. I just recently completed a 10 by 10 denim tapestry that is at the Science Fleet Center right now, and it was a community effort. That taught me so much about myself. I'm usually not the one to ask for help, and the beautiful thing is that my community always shows up for me. I feel like it's such a beautiful thing, especially during a time where we kind of feel isolated and we're all going through our own personal things. And so I feel like for me, like creating that very inclusive environment and people coming in and sharing their stories and talking about how their mom used to sew, their grandma used to sew, and for me, I'm like, oh, I get to be like this comforting thing for you. And that really has been so gigantically impactful for me, for my family.
Yeah. Well, before we go,
Yeah.
do you have any advice for someone just getting started in this?
Yes. Just start. For me, the way that I started was like I was just cutting things and then sewing them together, and I feel like that exploration phase is like such a fun place to be. And I say with sewing, there's no right or wrong way of doing it. It's an expression of oneself. The more time you invest in it, the better you're gonna get. So it's like, don't expect perfection, just start. And if you need advice, please come in and visit. We're trying to have more open studio time in the studio for people to just come in and hang out and sew.
That is excellent. I've been speaking with Claudia Rodriguez Bizanski. She's the clothing designer behind Sew Loka, a sewing studio and shop in Barrio Logan. Claudia, thank you so much.
No, thank you for having me.
That was me!